Welcome to the Leaderish Podcast with your hosts, Regina and Doris.
Hey, Doris. How's it going?
Hey, Regina. It's going very well. How about you?
It's going great. I've had a great week. I'm really excited about this episode. And I wanted to tell you before we introduce our guest, a woman who I've known for many years but has not been a listener called me this weekend and said, I have been listening to all of your podcasts and they are so helpful. I'm in this really great place of transition and I love listening and I cannot believe how many nuggets are in the podcast that you and Doris talk about that are just for me. I was floored.
I love that. I love hearing all of these great reviews that we're getting. The people that I talk to really love our podcast as well. But that's very specific with the great nuggets. And that is wonderful to hear. And I'm sure that we'll have another number of great nuggets that our listeners are going to take away from today. And I will start by saying that networking works. You and I connected through networking.
That's
And
right.
the guest that we have on today is someone that I met through another networking event. And so I'm a strong believer in networking, and I am excited to introduce Ellyn Jansen. We have been working together for about a year. I think we met almost a year and a half ago, and we've been working together on some projects for about a year. And Ellyn, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Good morning, Regina, and good morning, Doris. Great to be here, and I really appreciate the invite to the podcast. So a little bit about myself. I have had a very long career in banking and financial services. I have worked with companies from small privately held companies to Fortune 500 companies. And within those organizations, I've always been the person that has been brought in to fix things. People call it turnaround, but mostly I come in there and fix things. And I really enjoyed that piece. I love the problem solving. I love the building the strategy. But more importantly, I love working with the people and watch that change happen. I've led business lines ranging from $80 million to $15 billion. I've had different teams from 5 people to 500 people in my groups. It has been a lot of fun. Whenever you have a turnaround, one of the things that's very important is you have to have a plan. There has to be a plan. And I always enjoyed that piece of the business. So about 3.5 years ago, I stepped away from banking and I decided to work on my own company that really helped business owners work on their plans, build their plans, but more importantly, implement them. So I've had a lot of fun over the last 4 years working with companies that, one, I enjoy working with, and people I enjoy working with, and on projects I enjoy working on. It's been a great transition from banking to my own company and working on strategy. In addition, I'm really involved in the community. Currently, I serve on 2 boards. One is the Nashville General Hospital Foundation Board, and the other is Water Walkers, which services the kids at risk in the Edge Hill community, which is one of the poorest communities in Nashville. We do mentoring in math and science and reading. And in the summers, the kids are taken to Percy Priest Lake to learn how to swim and water ski and wakeboard. It's a great organization.
Wow. Going from financial institutions to being on the board in healthcare and then also within our community, helping at-risk children. That is beautiful.
Thank you.
And I also know another little tidbit about you, Ellyn. You love pickleball. You and I have
Oh,
played
my.
pickleball together. We're going to talk about planning today. I know that we as humans sometimes do a very poor job of planning, especially when it comes to long-term planning. And if we think about what might happen 3, 5, even 10 years out, we don't necessarily plan very well for that. And today, specifically, we're going to talk about succession planning. And I know that you are an expert at that. And I know that you've helped some of your companies with succession planning. And when we talk about succession planning inside an organization, what does that mean for you, Ellyn?
That's a great question because a lot of times people look at succession planning as, do I have enough money to step out of my company? And how long before I can step out of my company, knowing how much money I want to make? From my perspective, it's a little bit different. It's what would happen if something happened unexpectedly? What if something happens tomorrow? You can't just plan for the future when you're ready to sell the company or step out of the company, retire. You really have to plan for the long term and the what if scenarios. I work with companies really to help them with that what if scenario. What if something happens tomorrow? How is the company going to continue to function and still prepare for that future 3 to 5 years out?
And what about, say, a large organization where people are planning to be promoted, for example?
Mhm.
Perhaps I might be at a managerial level and I want to be promoted to a director or AVP or VP level over the course of my career. I think we're going to talk a little bit today about how I can prepare for that, how I can prepare for the people to take my role as I plan on moving up in the organization.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that we find is that there's a number of surveys out there that show that 70% of private companies do not have a formal succession plan.
Yeah.
75% of family-owned businesses also do not have succession plans. And what that leads to is if something happens, it's chaos, right? You have chaos, you have leadership gaps, then you end up with turnover. The client experience is suffering, clients end up leaving, and then the business suffers. Succession planning is so critically important because the domino effect happens. So you really do have to plan for it.
Yeah, I think that when we think about business continuity, that is one of the most important factors when we think about who's going to take your spot. Now, it doesn't even have to be the CEO or
Oh.
the head of the company. What if your chief sales officer or your head of HR decides to, I don't know, go on a 6-month cruise?
Mhm.
And then not come back? What happens to the organization when we think about continuity? We know that can cause a lot of turmoil when there's unexpected vacancies. And so figuring out what those key positions are and what those critical roles are within your organization becomes very important when we're thinking about who needs it.
Mhm.
What are some of the roles that you see most often that are critical and need a succession plan?
I would say one of the top roles is definitely the CFO role.
Oh, yeah.
That one is very critical. And a lot of times people think I can just slide a person in there that's a CPA or something like that, not realizing that role is so critical that you really have to have that continuity from within
Yeah.
and the expertise as well.
Right,
So,
because you almost need that homegrown knowledge. You need that knowledge that comes with
Mhm.
years and reps and experience and exposure within the organization in order to understand exactly how the business runs, how it makes money, how it loses money, and what levers you can pull to make adjustments.
Right. So that CFO position is probably one of the ones that's very critical for making sure that you have that plan in place. The other one is usually like a director of productivity or somebody who is really leading more local teams, the person that has the technical knowledge, the people that have the technical
Ah.
knowledge. Those are the ones you really have to plan for as well, because again, it goes back to they understand all the nuances of the company. When that intellectual capital leaves, that's a huge gap that needs to be fulfilled. That high middle management role is one of the other ones you really need to plan for because there's a lot of technical expertise that leaves.
That's interesting that you bring that up because several years ago, I worked at an organization and they called me the historian. I had
Mhm.
been there quite some time and I had gathered a lot of history even when I was new in the organization. When I left, the members of the organization would still call me
Mhm.
to get a history lesson, essentially. I wish I would have charged them for that now that I think about it. I didn't. But if you think about it, that historical knowledge is very important for most organizations, which is why I find it so interesting that only 19% of CEOs are homegrown, meaning they will go and recruit someone to take over a CEO role instead of build the knowledge and experience and exposure over time
Mhm.
for a leader to take that role.
Absolutely. And a lot of the times it's because they haven't taken the time or they've viewed succession planning as when they retire. So now all of a sudden things happen and they have to find somebody quicker. And so they go outside because somebody else has already done the job, quote unquote. And so it's because they really haven't planned for that change in their lifestyle. A family member got sick. They're going to step away from the day-to-day of the CEO role. They really haven't prepared for that. And they always think that they have more time than they do. That's one of the things that a lot of executives find is that I'm not ready to retire. I've got 5 years, I got 10 years, and then things happen. Or else a lot of times they think they already have a successor. They know that, oh, so-and-so is going to take my spot when I get in. That's great that you have it, but you really haven't done all of the assessment that needs to be done and built that plan to make sure that it's going to be a smooth transition. People just don't know where to start, so it doesn't happen.
That's a great segue to my next question is how do they get started? What would be the first step? Yes, the CEO is important, the CFO is important, but as we said earlier, this could be with any role in the organization. And what steps could managers or VPs take to begin succession planning for every important role at the organization?
I think the first step they really need to do is identify some of those critical roles and the requirements within them. It's really not just the job description of those roles. It really is more about what is required to be successful in this role. What kind of leadership skills are necessary to be successful in this role? It's not generic saying, oh, I have to have empathy. I have to be able to have great listening skills. There's a lot of other things that may be more critical for that particular role. So you really have to do an assessment of what are the critical roles and what are the requirements of those. That would be step one.
Yeah, and I think that also a competency model can come in really handy here
Mhm.
too. If an organization has a leveled competency model that is specific for every level, then what it does is it helps you identify those skills and competencies and behaviors a little bit easier
Right,
than just throwing a dart at a dartboard or thinking that you know what those competencies are. You
right.
can then assess your team members who
Mhm.
may be potential successors for that critical role. And
Right.
also, you can assess the incumbent as well to see what skills are really making them stand out as an effective leader within that organization.
Exactly. And that successor readiness grid that you may want to create as well is going to identify who is in line for these roles, not just one person, maybe. When are they going to be ready? 1 year, ready now? And what is it that they have to work on? You really need to look at the successor readiness as well. And back to your comment on competency readiness, very critical. What are those specific competencies that are required for success in that particular role? Where are the gaps that some of these successor candidates have? It's really about how am I going to develop a plan for that individual person? The other thing too is you want to make sure that the organization is ready. You want to make sure that you've identified those key roles. There's active development within the organization, and there's actual discussion around how that knowledge is going to be transferred. That's really some of the things you have to think about. Is the organization ready for this transition as well? And how do I get the organization ready? So those are some of the things that you have to look at as you're building out this plan of succession. It's not simply saying, I know who's going to take the role, but how are they going to take the role? When are they going to take the role? And how can I make sure that they're going to be successful as they work through taking over as a higher level leader in the organization?
What are
That's
some of the things that will help us know if the organization is ready? Because we spend a lot of time on the people and how do we know when the people are going to be ready and what we need to do to develop them. But you mentioned the organization. How do we know when the organization's ready for this?
Organization really takes a lot of communication. All right. And that's why it is important to have a plan built for succession, because the organization has to understand that, one, you want to promote from within whenever you can. Two, you do want to also bring new, fresh ideas into the organization, and the people within the company have to understand this is how you're planning to continue to grow the company internally as well as externally. People have to feel that they have that opportunity to continue to grow within the company. So you have to have that learning organization. People have development plans. People know that they have that opportunity to move up into the next role or expand the current role that they have. Everybody doesn't have to be moving up the ladder. They can also be moving horizontally as well and just expanding their knowledge. And then people need to understand, I can learn other areas of the company, so that knowledge is being transferred from one individual to a group of individuals. Those are just some of the things you can do to make sure the organization is ready. But culture has a lot to do with organizational readiness. And that's a whole nother subject.
I want to go back to something else you said, that the organization needs to have a discussion on how that knowledge is transferred.
Mhm.
What would be the process on that? Is that an annual discussion, quarterly discussion? Is that something that comes from the top down, bottom up? What would you say in terms of that discussion or that knowledge transfer? What's the very first thing we need to do to start that discussion in an organization?
Yeah, that knowledge transfer is ongoing. It's ongoing. So one of the things that something as simple as making sure people are cross-trained, or people, that's one thing. Two, you could have a rotational opportunity for people. You're going to spend a week working this machine, or you're going to spend a week in this particular department, or a month in this particular department. You're going to split time to actually be intentional about learning different areas of the company. So it's not that you have to be totally immersed in it, but it could be something where you have a mentor in one of the other departments. Those are just some of the things you can do within the company for knowledge transfer. But it is absolutely ongoing. It is not something that happens only annually. It is something that is ongoing and within the culture of the organization.
One of the organizations I worked for, we started talking about job shadowing. We're very similar to that, but you would take, maybe it was a week or a month or a quarter, where you would spend a certain number of hours shadowing someone else. And perhaps it was a role that you might be interested in taking over a year from now or 6 months from now. But today you're just going to shadow that person and watch how he or she operates, how he or she, in the example you gave, the machine. And perhaps you would wind up running that machine at some point, but we're going to start just by you watching that other person run that machine or manage that report or whatever that job happens to be. But I think job shadowing is something sometimes we talk about it for a younger person. You have high schoolers or college age kids coming in and job shadowing. But I think within an organization, that's a great way for someone just to even explore the opportunity and see if it's something that they want to do one day.
And that's where a mentoring program comes in quite often, because a lot of times our companies just don't have the opportunity to have people move into a role for 90 days when they really have to run the day-to-day piece of the business. That's why the mentoring piece really helps, where people can get immersed quickly and understand some of the nuances, and then just periodically shadow people within different organizations to see how it works. Some companies also do some formal discussions. They have people that are high potential, and they have different departments come in and talk to them on a regular basis, where they're going to talk about the finance group, the sales group, the operational production areas. Those high potential leaders may come in on a regular basis and learn different things about each department within the organization. That's another way that people are transferring some of that knowledge.
Yeah, I put together a program exactly like that, right? It is really hard for organizations to run rotational programs where you are pulled out of your role because now
Mhm.
someone else has to do your role. They're very effective. And if your organization can run a rotational program, it is probably the most effective way to get people the experience and the exposure and the competencies that they need to learn multiple facets of the business. But
Mhm.
that's not always possible. Determining who your high potentials are within your organization is extremely beneficial. And then creating a program that will help them get that knowledge together in
Mhm.
short bursts is also very helpful. So we had executives from each one of our different functions within the organization come in and talk to a group of high potential directors to help
Mhm.
them build their knowledge so that they could understand how the business worked so that they could make better decisions for the business and continue to grow. We had a
Right.
lot of success with that program. The information was then also fed to the director's leaders so that the leader of the director and the director could have conversations about what they learned to go even deeper. That brings in a little bit of coaching from your leader. It brings in the cross functional knowledge. You also said mentorship. We also gave each of those leaders, those director level leaders, a mentor within the
Mhm.
business to help them go even deeper. And that helps them grow and develop and get the information that they need to understand that business. So, pulling all of those things together can be extremely beneficial when you can't do a big rotational program.
Another thing on the mentorship, a mentorship doesn't necessarily have to be a year, 3 years. You have the same mentor the whole time. A lot of times companies are finding value in rotating those mentors. You may end up with a mentor that you're 5, 10 years later, that's still your mentor, the person that had such an impact on your career or on your personal life. But also changing that mentor within a company on a regular basis also helps continue that deep dive into the specific departments or areas or functional areas.
I know we have talked about mentorship, but I don't think we've had an episode dedicated to mentorship.
It just comes up.
It does come up, it comes up all the time.
Mhm.
When I want to talk about mentorship, one of the challenges that I found is that organizations have great intentions of having mentorship programs, and then they run them for a month, 2 months, 3 months, and they fall apart. And
Mhm.
the mentors lose interest in being mentors. Perhaps the mentees lose interest or they don't do what they need to do to be a good mentee. What are some tips that you could give organizations to have a more robust mentorship program that doesn't
Yeah.
fall apart?
One of the things I believe is back to what I just said earlier is having those rotational mentors. It's those fresh ideas. It is the new person. It's building another relationship. I think that's really helpful in continuing the momentum of a mentorship program. Two, you have to have people that want to be in the mentorship program.
Amen.
Yeah, if they're not doing the work that they need to do, they need to come out of the mentorship program because it just drags it down. You bring that next person in there that has that energy and potential and willingness to do what it takes because they really do want to grow. Some people are going into mentorship programs just to get quote unquote exposure, but they're not willing to do the work that it takes to be in there. Changing that out when people aren't delivering, they don't get to stay in the program.
And the same goes for mentors too. If they don't want
Yes,
to be in, do not force your mentors to do this,
right.
but reward your mentors who do
Mm-hmm.
participate in the program. I think that is crazy important
Right.
for a mentorship program because forcing a mentor, all it does is it creates stagnation, it creates
Mhm.
bitter feelings. You've got a mentee who's not being loved on by their mentor. Okay, it's Valentine's Day. We'll go with loved on. Then you've got someone who has this really great mentor. They're talking, and now you've got someone who is disengaged because they've got a cruddy mentor. You got to have mentors who want to do this. You can't volunteer.
Right.
mentors to be part of
Absolutely.
a mentorship program, especially one that is this important when you're dealing with your high potentials.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons why when you're building your program, you need to make it clear that the mentors don't have to be in there for this is a 5-year commitment. This is an ongoing commitment. This could be, hey, we need you to mentor for the next 6 months. And you re-up every 6 months. And you also evaluate the program. I think that's one of the things that people don't do is evaluate how well is the program working? How many mentors are really reaching out to their mentees? How are the mentees feeling when they're having those sessions with the people? Are they really feeling engaged in learning? And do they feel their knowledge is expanding? Having an evaluation of how well the program is doing and communicating those results, not just to up, but out, is really very important. And also those testimonials within the mentorship program, very important.
And just to add to that, I do believe that a mentorship program must have some sort of structure,
Oh,
especially if we have a clear objective. And in this case, our clear objective is to build the knowledge and skills of high potentials by providing the mentor and the mentee a little bit of structure, not over
mhm.
structured, but a little bit of structure to
Right.
help them get there
Mhm.
is hugely beneficial for not only the organization, but to the mentor and the mentee. It's hard for
Absolutely.
mentors to decide what to talk about today with their mentee. It's hard for mentees to say, what should I ask about? What is within bounds and what's out of bounds? By having some structure there, at least you've got a jumping off point for each of your mentorship sessions.
Absolutely. That framework is very important. And then having some of the supplemental data with it, not just data, but supplemental training with it. If you're going to talk about leadership or you're going to talk about P&Ls, giving them the tools to be able to have some good conversation is also very important.
And that's such a good point in terms of that structure. I have had mentorship relationships where the mentor said, "How can I help you?" And we didn't know each other enough for me to really answer that question. And that
Right.
person didn't know me enough to be able to guide me to what was missing. That person didn't
Right.
even know what my gaps were.
Mhm.
And that type of mentor relationships really doesn't work. I think you
Right.
need to know each other a little bit. So,
Mhm.
getting to know each other, then putting that structure around perhaps the manager of the mentee needs to be aware of what does this person need. So, when that relationship happens with the mentor, it's very clear what that mentor can offer the mentee as that relationship goes on,
Right.
especially in terms of succession planning.
Doris, what I love about that, if I pull together what Ellyn said about figuring out what the gaps are with your high potentials,
Mhm.
and you feed those gaps to the mentor and the mentee, you're very upfront and honest with them about where their gaps are. Now your mentor can help fill some of those gaps that you identified through talent review or through the succession planning exercises that you did.
Absolutely. I was just going to go back to that as well. Those assessments are very important, not only to the mentorship program, but to succession planning in general. One of the assessments that I do that has been very helpful in the succession planning, it's a self-assessment. I have a list of all of the leadership skills that are required for a leader to be successful. Listening skills, decision making, problem solving, clear communication, direct communication, having difficult conversations. You have a list of all of these things and you let the person say, is this a strength of mine or is this a challenge?
Yeah.
And then the other piece that is different is who else in the company has that strength? You're going to take all of the people that have done this assessment. You're going to see, this is where I see my gaps, right? Here's my strengths, here's my gaps.
Yep.
Then when you do that other piece of it where you ask who else has the strengths, now you can see, oh, I really thought I was strong in communication, and nobody else in the leadership or high potential program thinks that I'm strong in communication.
Right.
So that's a gap. It's an opportunity for me to say, okay, this is what I need to work on. Now let's build my development program around that. Also, when those people say, oh, this person is great at conflict resolution, And I thought, I'm not really good at conflict resolution, but everybody else thinks that. Another gap. So how do I build my confidence in conflict resolution or recognize that is a strength of mine? So that also goes in my development plan. But that assessment that I do with people has been very eye-opening, because you see the people who really are the leaders that you may not have thought were leaders. But when you have everybody else looking at that person, that's giving you a big clue as to who could possibly be even more successful as they move up within the organization, because they have the respect of the other people.
That's right. I love this. What a great and rich conversation we've had today. We are about at time, so I'd love for Doris to start with a few things that she really took from this episode that was impactful. And then, if it's okay, I'll share a few too.
Absolutely. So the first one, I circled this 3 times. I really loved the successor readiness grid, which focused on who, when, and gaps. So who is ready? When are they going to be ready? And what gaps do they have that they need to fill? And the other one was what you just said a moment ago, building confidence in skills that I have, but I didn't know were strong enough to share or strong enough to be really important skills. Sometimes we focus on, I think I'm really good at something and other people don't. So obviously that's something we need to work on, but that building confidence in what I already have, I think is really important. I love that.
Yeah, that's great. And to build on that, I think the one thing that I hadn't considered until talking with Ellyn that I just find terribly impactful was the last 30 seconds where Ellyn went through the self assessment. Here are all the skills we need. You assess yourself. That's easy. I've done that a million times. Here's where it differs from even what I've ever tried. And I've been doing this stuff for a bazillion years, is that identifying someone who has that skill. So if it is empathy or communication, I put in that Ellyn is a great communicator. She's someone I aspire to be like in communication. And then I can now compare that data. Not only do I have the data on myself, but I have data on others as well. And digging through that data and leveraging that data and sharing that data back out is hugely beneficial for growth, for engagement, for retention, all of that. And then we get to business continuity because we start building those skills through individual development plans. So that was just absolutely beautiful. And I loved it.
And I'll just tack on the retention. We didn't even talk about retention today, but everything that we talked about today is vitally important for retention.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing you want to do is build someone's skills and then have them leave.
Right.
So I think all of this work that we're doing does help our retention.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Whew, what an episode. Holy cow. I hope you enjoyed this as much as Doris and I did, talking with Ellyn and her sharing her amazing expertise. You can find all of Ellyn's contact information in the show notes, how to get in touch with her. Feel free to reach out. She'd love to talk to you. If you have a moment to leave us a review, please do so. If you found this episode helpful, would you share it with a friend? It would be the biggest honor that you could give us is if you sent this episode to one of your friends. And finally, if you're interested on being on the Leaderish podcast, you have an engaging topic, just reach out to us. Let's chat about that. You can reach out to us at leaderishpodcast@gmail.com. Share a little bit about your topic and we'll follow up with you and meet with you and see if it would be a good fit for our podcast. All right, ladies, another great episode. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.